Good morning. Thank you everybody for joining us. Today is the 8th session of the Cybersecurity Executive Program. Super interesting topic to talk about digital platforms. And lucky day today that we have two of the most amazing and most experienced people in the world talking about this. We have Shiva Ram, Head of Business Security and Fraud Risk for Wholesale Banking at Digital Channels for HSBC. Shiva has been in the space for over 20 years, has been helping and looking at our own organizations across the board. He co-founded and ran a California-based security consulting company, but is super exposed to this topic. So it will be great to hear his insights, thoughts, and everything that's going on around that side. And then Nadia Hijazi, she's the Global Head of Wholesale Digital Channels for HSBC. Nadia is responsible for the delivery of the digital strategy for HSBC's digital platform across the wholesale business. Huge business everywhere, multiple countries, end-to-end management, super interesting, 53 countries, covering a total of over 2 billion in transactions. So huge exposure, huge understanding of what's going on, and has been doing this for some time. Nadia is a fierce advocate for diversity and inclusion, and is consistently striving to represent women in technology, both inside the organization and across a number of industries, led initiatives and events. So we're super lucky to have both of them sharing their experiences and talking to us about this. So welcome, and Doris, I pass it on to you to kick it off.
Thank you, Mauricio. Nadia, Shiva, welcome. We are very excited to have you here with us today to continue increasing our awareness on cybersecurity, cyber threats, and continue learning on recommendations to use securely digital platforms. So to start the conversation, what do you think are the main challenges in cybersecurity that organizations are currently facing worldwide? Nadia, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, sure. I guess just to frame the discussion, so cybersecurity attacks can happen to any organization at any time. Many established organizations such as the Marriott, the MGM Resorts, Twitter, British Airways, and many others have fallen victim to cyber attacks. And ransomware particularly targets public health authorities and other public organizations, as they know the criticality of these services and the challenges around cyber investment. So it makes it an easy target for them to penetrate and demand money for the return of the service to these institutions. And then more than 1 in 4 data breaches involved small businesses because they're also very vulnerable because they have a lack of knowledge in the area and they don't necessarily have a security expert embedded into their team. So when we kind of look at what the challenges are, they fall into a number of categories. So large corporations and financial institutions, they've got many demands on their budget and they need to prioritize across them. They need to make a decision, do I invest in the discretionary, do I invest in the regulatory, do I invest in cyber? It's a huge list of items. The public ministries and authorities that are very seriously being targeted at the moment, they have funding constraints. You know, they're public authorities, they're ministries, they're government funded, they have limited resources, they have a large surface area in which to operate, and they have to make some very hard decisions about what they can invest. And small businesses who can't afford security experts are very dependent on their own knowledge to do that. So if you're a small business, you've really got to work out what to do. In the UK, the National Security Agency provides online material and guidance aimed at small businesses, as well as enabling them to be certified in a program called Cyber Essentials Certification. And firms are then encouraged to display the certification on their websites. What this does, it turns an investment in security into something that also brings value to the business and ensures that the investment in cyber is not only seen as a cost. And when I did some research on it, there was a paper that had been written by PwC that said, for companies looking to prioritize cyber, the best way to do this, and was successful in 55% of all cases going to CEO, was that cyber-related investment also related to growth. So you're able to demonstrate by telling your customers, I'm a safe environment for you to deal with, I'm a safe environment where you need to hold your data, that actually encourage more business to go towards those corporations. And in those cases, the investment into security, because it brought value, was more likely to be approved, you know, against all of the other priorities. Similarly, there are many governments around the world that offer particular certification and training for small businesses so that they can also prove that they've got the right protection. It provides really good coverage for their customers that can see that and helps them get around this barrier of investment. And then what I would say is, once you've got the investment, then really there are kind of a number of areas that you need to sort of invest it in, which I'm sure Steve will talk about. So it should be spent on protection, including the education of teams, detection, response, and recovery, so that what you're doing is you're building the future capability and agility to fight the next potential threats.
Thank you, Nadia, for sharing. Shiva, I don't know if you want to complement.
Yeah, I mean, I do, agree with what Nadia's just mentioned about funding and, prioritization. Like from a technical side, what, we see are primarily social engineering attacks. Like a lot of the, very large companies have been attacked using social engineering, and they have fallen victim as well. That is a significant challenge. The issue is that, especially for larger companies, you have a lot more people to actually train up on social engineering, and people don't know each other in a lot of large organizations, especially for multinational organizations. So it's easier sometimes to actually impersonate somebody else within the organization. The other thing is standard attacks that have always happened, like DDoS, denial of service attacks, credential stuffing. So the credential stuffing is another account takeover kind of attack where, even though your application or your network may be secure, somebody else loses information, some other website or some other service provider loses information, and then that information is again used against your users, and your network. So that is another major, attack vector that we see. And then the other thing is, like, as people move, more and more infrastructure goes into the cloud, there are a whole bunch of cloud, based attacks that happen, typically with, information that is stored within cloud storage buckets that are not actually secured properly. So I would stick to those major points, and we'll obviously talk about a few other things, down the line, but those would be my major, challenges that I see at this point.
Thank you, Shiva. And from your experience talking about the methods of cyber attacks that are occurring right now in banking platforms, what do you see as the most common methods? Shiva.
Sorry, go ahead, Nadia.
Sorry,
go ahead, Nadia.
I was going to say that just to build on Shiva's point, social engineering is now recognized as one of the most effective ways to obtain information and break through the defense walls. And the reason it's effective is because technical defenses have become substantially better at protecting against outside entities, but obviously the same investment hasn't been put into humans, and humans are really the weakest link in anybody's security. And certainly I see many examples of this on a day-to-day basis. So customers are phoned up and they're told on the phone that it's the bank fraud department phoning them up, and that they need to undertake activity to release a payment. They'll often tell them there's a payment stuck in a sanctions queue, or there's a payment being held by a beneficiary bank and waiting to be released for additional information. And these are things that people expect to be called about. These are things that people expect to get questions about. So it lowers their defenses and they start to give information quite freely around it. Similarly, many customers receive emails that they believe to be from suppliers, but it's actually from the hacker who's hacked into their email servers and is communicating with them. So you think you're talking to Dory, but actually you're talking to the hacker, and the hacker's guiding you on what to do. Very commonly seen. We see customers who receive fake invoices and information. So you think, oh my goodness, it's a piece of paper, it must be valid. No, there are some really sophisticated attacks out there in the way that they measure it. all of it is associated with a sense of urgency, a sense of if you don't do something, something will happen. So that you have this combination of the fear, the trust, all of it kind of coming together to encourage them. And these attacks are very, very effective because the hacker understands the psychology. When we think about cyber, everybody thinks about it as a very technical topic. Part of it is, but actually the most successful part of it is the psychology, but also the part that the people underestimate, which is hackers understand banking. So they understand also how to move money quickly, and they understand what banks do. So for example, in the UK, they found that a lot of social engineering was because the banks don't match the account name with the account number, they would show the name of the person that you expect to pay, but the account number would belong to someone else. So they were using that loophole. So the UK government introduced something called confirmation of payee, which is where the matching of the account name and the account number. Japan has done the same, and you see a number of people looking to do that. And what I would say to everyone is, you know, the attacks are very sophisticated, and even seasoned bankers fall, you know, foul of it. And one of the things that you need to do to help educate your teams is kind of a number of areas. So kind of operate in a zero trust. So if you receive an email or a text message asking you to do something, don't take action. You know, phone someone up, phone someone you know, check it, you know. Don't provide any additional information. So if you go onto a website and they start asking you for your OTP token, or to press a button, or to provide credentials, or for your, you know, date of birth, and they'll say, if you send us the date of birth, we'll send you a gift on your birthday. You know, these are all the tricks that are being used to harvest your information. And then look for signs of urgency. If you don't do this, your payment will be held, your supplier won't receive it, your goods won't be released. And then I think for me, the most important thing is moving away from the concept of cyber is about technology, and saying everybody in your company is responsible for cyber, and everyone has to have an understanding of these kind of controls and how they have to work together to close the door on the attack.
Just to add to Nadia's point about social engineering, you know, like, so on the technical side, a lot more, you know, like a lot of the attacks happen on a company's network through unpatched systems, through systems that are like exposed that the company may not pay too much attention to, that has a vulnerability because, you know, like it's using an older version of drivers or older version of software. So that can be used to actually get into the network and then compromise the network. This I'm talking about from a you know, like not from a payment security point of view alone, you know, like, but also from a overall, you know, like a client organization taking care of their own network, you know, because these kinds of attacks can then be used to gather more information that can be used in a social engineering attack. You know, and then, you know, one of the things that you would want to do is make sure that, you know, like you're patched up to the latest, you know, like software versions on all your systems. Also segmentation. So a lot of organizations, or actually quite a few organizations, don't have proper segmentation. So you want to compartmentalize. So, you know, if you look at an oil tanker, right? So you don't have one full, you know, compartment with all the oil sitting in one tank. You have like multiple tanks inside, so that if one leaks, you actually contain the leak to just that one particular area or that one particular tank, and the rest of the tanks are still okay. So the same thing, you know, like you want to do within your organization as well. So you want to compartmentalize, you know, your network so that if something happens in one area, it is contained to just that area. So compartmentalization, it's called network segmentation. So that is something that, you know, like we see a lot, and that is in the vulnerability that attackers use a lot. Once they get in using an unpatched system, possibly, then they'll laterally move to different systems within the organization and then start, you know, gathering information as well as, you know, causing harm. So to add to social engineering, that is another, you know, vector of attack that we see.
Thank you, Shiva. So yeah, social engineering, one of the major threats to be aware of. And thinking of proper digital hygiene, you already mentioned some of the not to do's, the absolute not to do's when managing digital platforms, but could you add more about this? Nadia.
Yeah, sure. So I think when we look at the digital platforms, one of the things that we look at is a number of things. Is if your own internal platform, what is your security review process, right? So do you have an independent review of your security and assessment? Are you operating to a framework and a standard like NIST? But there are many other standards around that. What controls do you have across the teams that have access to those digital platforms? A lot of the fraud you see is based on poor entitlement and user management across it. What notification procedures do you have across your system so that if something does happen, that you know it? How do you as a business track whether your patching is up to date, whether your equipment is on the latest security standard? You know, and this is something that we do constantly as a business. People say to me, well, isn't that IT? I say, no, actually, it's almost like looking after your house. You want to make sure that you know where, if there's any leaks anywhere, if the leaks are in a dangerous place, if you've got, you know, an oven in a bad place, you've got a loose wire somewhere. Security is the same. It's really about, from a business perspective, on digital platforms, really understanding the controls that you have, how quickly those controls need to evolve, what the threats are that you're seeing in your environment. You know, for example, in Mexico, we see a lot of fake websites where people create a fake, you know, people go and Google HSBCnet, it comes up in Google Ads, and the hackers have actually, you know, put that there, and people think they're clicking on HSBCnet and they're not, they're clicking on a fake site. So how do you protect your platform from that? How do you educate the customers and say, don't ever do that, don't search, always put in the URL, check the information. So I think there's many criteria that we are constantly evolving. What's your fraud system? How many things are getting caught? Have you got a high accuracy rate? And what are the other controls on the system?
To add to Nadia's points, you know, like, so some of the things that you should never do, you know, like would be, you know, like never provide your credentials to anybody. And credentials would mean user ID, you know, your passwords, your OTP values. If somebody, like Nadia mentioned earlier, you know, like when somebody, you know, like as part of a social engineering attack, somebody calls you and say they are from the fraud team, provide, you know, press the green button, provide me the OTP, press the yellow button, provide me the, you know, the value that you see. So that you would never provide, because we would never ask for, you know, the bank, you know, like never asks for your OTP codes or your passwords. We know, you know, well, we don't actually know the passwords or the OTP codes, but we don't need that to access your account. We have backend systems where, you know, the staff members are already authenticated to get access to certain things that they require. So, you know, like, and we don't need a OTP from you to have, as a customer, to cancel a payment. We can do that, you know, like ourselves. So never ever provide that. Another thing, you know, like Nadia also mentioned phishing, you know, where you go to some other website and provide information. So a lot of the people, you know, while Google search is one of the ways of going to a phishing site, another way is actually people getting emails from fraudsters, and then, you know, with a link in there that says, you know, like you have, you know, some activity you need to perform, you know, like this payment is held, you know, like you click on this link to actually release the payment or something like that. So people click on that link, which is actually taking you to a fraudster site where they gather your credentials, and then they use that to log into HSBCnet or whichever application, banking application that you have, or whichever application that you want to log into. So, you know, never click on links in emails, you know, especially if it is coming from a person that is unknown to you. Even for known people, look at where that link is pointing to. You know, like, is that a location that you want to actually go to? Is that something that you know? Is something that you want to look at? So, you know, like I would basically say, you know, like never ever provide credentials to anybody, even within your own organization, because that can actually lead to insider fraud, you know, like impersonation, you know, like, so somebody trying to set you up, you know, as a user by using your credentials. So, you know, like don't even, you know, provide that to anybody. You know, passwords, credentials are always for the user only, right? You know, that's basically what I would say, you know, like do not ever do.
Thank you, Nadia, Shiva. Great recommendations to have in mind. And now, what could you recommend to do when encountering, suspecting, or even discovering that your company has been compromised or attacked? Nadia?
Yeah, so I would recommend that you trigger your incident response plan immediately. So every organization should have an incident response plan that's ready across the business and technology teams. So where we've seen customers attacked by ransomware, the ones that are have a very good incident response plan, they will have the details of their banks, they will have the details of their accounts, they will have the details of the types of payments they need to make. And they will immediately kind of mobilize on the business side to make sure that payroll gets paid, that systems are disabled if they're worried that access has been achieved by the hacker to those systems. And also on the technology side, they will implement a response plan that includes the teams that will be responsible for recovering. And what I would say to you is in your response plan, you must always expect the worst. You know, for example, in a ransomware attack, expect that your teams will be cut off from the network and their laptops. So your plans must take this into account. You know, at the moment, we were always told BCP means taking your laptop to another place and working. But if your network is infected, the first thing they do is they close the network. And we see many customers on the business side that are quite shocked by this. They go to log on, they can't, their equipment is frozen, while the technology teams are trying to contain the ransomware. I would also say, as well as an incident plan, you should do simulation exercises. So practice both internally in case of an attack, but also practice with your bankers so that we know if this happens, what you expect from us, and that you're comfortable that there's a plan. So we do that all the time within HSBC. We do simulations, Shiva comes up with them, and then he does it unexpectedly to test the responses of the teams to make sure everybody understands what to do.
So Nadia mentioned a lot about the incident response plan. The first thing is to have an incident response plan. You know, like, so, you know, like you don't want to be in when you're under attack, you don't want to be creating an incident response plan. It's like, you know, when you're having a heart attack, you don't want to be writing a will. You want to have that will ready, right? So that's basically what you would do. You know, like you would have the incident response plan ahead of time, think of different scenarios, put that in place. And then, as Nadia mentioned, you know, rehearse the plan and think of different scenarios, right? So that is one thing. The second thing, you know, from on a client side, you know, like within their network side, you know, like, so, and their operations procedures, what do you do? First thing you want to do is contain the blast radius. So, you know, like you want to make sure that, you know, like you isolate the problem quickly and then contain the problem to a minimal area, right? Because the more it traverses, the more it becomes a bigger issue, you know, like the downtime is longer, recovery is more difficult, impact is higher. So you want to ensure that, you know, like you contain the problem as quickly as possible. And for that, you need to actually be able to detect that an attack has happened. So you need to invest in detection, you know, technologies, you know, so that is something. And then you have an RTO and RPO. RTO is the recovery time objectives and RPO is the recovery point objective. You know, have you decided what your RTO and RPO is? How long can you be down, you know, on your side without actually having your service up and running? Your network up and running, your network being shut down with nobody able to use it. Another point Nadia mentioned was the, you know, like the network being down, right? So when we had our, when some of our customers had, you know, ransomware attacks, one of the things that they found out was that, you know, like they couldn't log into the network. So our relationship managers started getting emails from Gmail accounts. We didn't know those Gmail accounts because we had no clue who they were, you know, like, so they were using, you know, like their own personal accounts to send us notifications, say, hey, stop the payments or do something, right? So the good thing is have alternate means of communications, you know, like set up already with your bankers. So, you know, give them extra numbers that you may want to call in from, or give them email IDs that you, and make sure that, you know, people are able to receive those emails, because sometimes, you know, like some organizations will block you know, external Gmail IDs, right? So, you know, like you want to make sure that, you know, you're able to use them in times of crisis. So planning is a huge deal. Have an incident response plan, and then also look at alternate methods of communication with your bankers or with any other, you know, service provider that you have to ensure that, you know, you are still able to communicate even if your networks are down and you're not able to access your computers or your network, your email accounts or anything like that. So that is something that is very critical.
Thank you, Shiva. The importance of working on prevention, planning these simulations and constantly rehearsing. Thank you. And As experts on digital platforms, what questions do you think are key to ask to our digital platforms providers to ensure they are covering the highest security standards? Nadia, we can start with you.
So I guess the first thing I would say is I would ask them for a third-party security review to understand, what an independent review has identified about their platform. I would ask them about what controls they have, what their notification procedures are in case of incidents, authentication methods, what are the responsibilities of the client versus the service provider, how quickly they can recover in the event of an attack. Have they got any use cases where they have had attack and where they can demonstrate that they've got recovery? What standards are they applying to their platform? So what are they aligning to? And are they up to date on all of their patching, all of their upgrades? And are they compliant with the local regulatory requirement in terms of security and controls? And Shiva, I'll hand over to you for the technical side.
Yeah. So we undertake, when we engage vendors, we undertake our service providers. We engage our third-party security team to actually do a review of their controls. We do the same thing for our others as well. So when customers engage us, so we provide answers. So we get regular questions from our customers asking us about our security posture. And it should not just be with the banks. You should be doing this with any security provider that you have. There might be other specific requirements. For example, if they are processing credit cards, you need to ask them, whether they are PCI compliant. You can get a, report on compliance or an attestation of compliance from them. What are the authentication methods that they support? Do they support multi-factor authentication? Depending on the criticality of the service, like for a banking application, they should be supporting multi-factor authentication, no questions asked. Anybody using just user ID and password, is not very secure. Even for multi-factor authentication, there are multiple, levels of security, right? So, if you're just using OTP, using SMS, the text messaging is actually a broken protocol. So you should not be using that for, other than alerts and notifications, you should not be using that for very critical security features, like authentication OTPs. So, ask for, whether they have phishing resistant multi-factor authentication. Do they do pen tests? So usually a service provider should be, we do, our platforms actually undergo 2 tests every year from a third-party security provider, in addition to all our internal security reviews that we do, like on almost a monthly basis now. We do third-party security vendor pen tests with twice a year. So do they do security reviews? Do they have any open issues? So those are things that you'd want to be asking questions about. Do they do vulnerability scanning? How often do they do it? So what is their patching cycle? So do they patch? Because one of the things that we talked about multiple times in this is that, have you patched, unpatched servers and unpatched devices outside on the network can be exploited, right? So, what is their patching schedule? So that is something that you would want to know and at least ask, what is their prioritization method, of severity of issues? So there are lots of things. Obviously, we can't cover everything, but so do a third-party security review. There are lots of questions online. You can download templates that you can customize for your own use, and then use that. And then as you go along, you'll also learn more, and then you can add and modify, delete, whatever you want with those questions. But you can start with the template that you can download. With us, we can also help you with some of these as well. So we provide a information security document, information security statement to customers. So you can actually use that as a basis for your questioning, your other vendors, because you have the answers, you can just create the questions for those and then provide that to your other vendors to actually ask them. So that would basically be my response. So your third-party security review, including all the controls within or the relevant controls within your service provider, would be the the way to go.
Thank you, Nadia. Shiva. And as experts on this matter, what are your recommendations on best practices on the usage of digital platforms? And let's start with cultural human factors to achieve proper digital hygiene. Nadia.
Yeah, so I think I think education. So your education of your teams for me is the #1 priority, and it's sort of, that's really a really major one. And also really in the education, really helping them understand, you know, where they can create weaknesses. You know, so everyone's great on social media at the moment, but social media is also a great place to harvest a lot of information. You know, people put a lot of information on LinkedIn, they put a lot of information all over social media. So really helping them understand that when you put that information there, it's not just available for friends and good people to see, it's also available for people who have, you know, ulterior motives to see as well. And they use that to establish trust with you. They use that to build a relationship because they know enough about you to convince you. I think the other thing is really strong credentials. You know, one of the challenges we have is everyone's got too many passwords. So try to find a credential that's more biometric based, you know, that's more definite, that's not about someone remembering a password, reusing the same password, writing it down. Similarly, don't use the personal information. Help people to understand that when you're building your security, avoid kind of the personal information as part of it, because people are asked, you know, when they're shopping to provide personal information. That personal information then can get reused and replayed. You know, be careful about how you use your SSO. So people will say, log on through your Facebook ID or log on through your Google ID. You know, we saw with the Cambridge Analytics case, those logons can be used for many, many things. And they can be used to, you know, take out data, build a profile. So be really careful, you know, explain to your teams where to check for that information so they can disable it and they know how to manage it. Make sure that you've got really clear internal reporting mechanisms, incident management plans. You know, empower your teams to ask questions. People often feel intimidated by cyber. They say, cyber, I don't understand that, I'm not a technical person. So I think one of the things that we try to do at HSBC is simplify it, turn it into examples so people can see. Speak to your banks, ask them to share what the latest attacks look like. So you've got current knowledge of how the hackers are operating. Many countries have national security websites that also provide guidance on what's happening. Really good to go in there. There's good resources, good material. And then make sure that you've got a really good communication process between yourself, your financial institutions, in case if something does go wrong, everybody can support you.
Just to add to Nadia's point about you know, the the government you know, websites, you know, like the Mexico actually has a cybersecurity program, Chapter 10. You know, like there is it's called Chapter 10. I remember it as a Chapter 10, but there is a cybersecurity requirements. You know, like that is applicable in a lot of cases. You know, for some of the requirements, actually most of the requirements are applicable to a lot of organizations. So you can actually use it regardless of whether you're a bank or not. You know, the other thing is to know, so whichever platform you're using, enable the security features of the platform. So if you can make your profile private, make sure that your profile is private. Make sure that, you know, like for example, on HSBCnet, we do have IP whitelisting. So that means people can only log on from specific IP addresses. You can't just log on from anywhere in the world. So that basically reduces the attack vector to somebody needing to be on your network to get in. So, you know, like the attack becomes a lot more complicated. The skill level required to launch this attack becomes, you know, higher, which means less number of people can attack you. You know, so there are lots of things that you can do. Enable alerting. You know, in Mexico specifically, a lot of alerts are actually mandatory. But if there is alerts that you can actually enable, like when you want to make a payment, when you want to, you know, set up some new user or whatever, if there is an alert that you can set up with your provider, make sure that you set that up. You know, entitlements is another area. You know, I think Nadia also mentioned this in one of her previous responses. You know, like least privilege is a significant principle in security. You only provide the level of privilege or level of rights, you know, permissions that a user requires to perform their function. Just because if I want to only make payments, I should only have payment creation function. If I don't authorize, I shouldn't have authorization functions. If I don't create users, and I'm a junior person, should not be allowed to create users. Don't give create user permission for users. So these are very basic stuff that can be done, and that should be done. And one of the biggest thing is like, entitlements and permissions. People give it because, oh, I may need it some other time, like down the line I may need it, so let's just give this guy an extra permission or whatever, and then like he can use it some other when he needs it. But then like if that user's credential gets hacked, or that account gets taken over, then the fraudsters also have access to the same privileges. So you want to use principle of least privilege as much as possible. That's a very significant control. Right. So yeah, I mean, from a empowering employees to ask questions. This is something that we have actually had a lot of success in with finding fraud. Customers call us and report, hey, something is not right with this, right? So then they just call us and say, report a fraud, right? So, and they can report a fraud to us immediately. So like if something feels wrong, like let them ask questions internally, or calling us to report a fraud or whatever. But like they need to be able to do that without fear. Oh, and like Nadia also mentioned earlier, that these fraudsters are always working on fear and urgency. Do it now, or like something will happen. So people need to be able to take that decision to say, you know what, hold on, I need to ask this question first before I actually do something. That is a very critical piece. So empowering users, your employees, is extremely critical, because they already know in their gut that something is wrong, like, and you need to empower them to actually be able to act on that feeling. So that's my response.
Thank you. So we already talked about these human factors. So moving to system factors, what do you think could be the basic security standards on systems that organizations must have in order to have a good level of cybersecurity?
So Steve, I'd suggest that you pick up this question.
Yeah. So there are lots of standards. Including from Mexico, from every country. Literally every country has standards on, like what are the minimum requirements of things to be done on a security side. There are also industry standards. For example, SANS, NIST produces a lot of standards. OWASP for applications produces a lot of standards. So so what you should be doing, what you should not be doing, and everything else. So the most basic things we talked about already, patching, make sure that what all your systems are patched. The other thing is knowing, like in the movie Matrix, right? Like long, like 1990s movie. But like the thing is, there is a like a scene where Neo meets the Oracle, and there on the top it says, know thyself. Know thyself basically here means know your platform. You need to know what you're protecting, right? Like you can't, if you don't know what your assets, where your assets are, and what your assets are, what are you going to protect? So you need to first discover what is available on your network, what is available within your organization, and then you can start building your protections out. Like a lot of the organizations, and I've done PCI DSS assessments, PA DSS assessments, like, and security, like as a consultant, I've done a lot of penetration testing work outside with other clients. One of the things that I've always come across, and which is something that I always used to exploit, is the fact that customers do not know where their things are, where their data is. So credit card information, they used to say, oh, it's in this database. But then when you look at it, you have like a help desk person taking down when on a call with a customer, taking down their credit card number, but writing it, putting it in they want to get so it's not just on the database, it's on a desktop sitting on a helpless person's device that nobody really understands that there's a risk over there. So
Shiva, I don't know if it's me or we're losing you.
Sorry.
Here,
can you hear me now?
Here, there, yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. So knowing where your assets are, ensure that like you have so you need to have discovery tools to understand like do scans and understand where your devices are. Then malware. So malware is a significant issue. Make sure that you have anti-malware solutions implemented with the latest signatures and latest upgrades to the software, because that is critical. Network segregation, segmentation. We talked about this earlier. Compartmentalization of your network. That is a significant issue because when something does happen, you are containing the issue to a smaller area. So that would be, like if you are able to do those, least privilege, network segmentation, and knowing where your assets are and patching them, like will solve a lot of your problems.
Thanks, Shiva. So we cover human and system factors. And moving to operational factors, what do you think could be the basic operational factors organizations should consider also to have this good level of cybersecurity standards?
I mean, I think, Dory, we've covered that quite a lot. I mean, maybe I suggest maybe we move to questions.
Yes, maybe we can take some questions from the audience. What do you think about digital tokens versus physical ones?
Shiva, why don't you go
What do you
first?
think it's more secure or the advantages?
Well, so, there is no, like this is more secure than the other. It all depends on the details, like as one of my, teammates used to keep saying, devil is in the details. You can have a very strong digital, OTP. You can have a very strong or a very weak, hardware OTP. My suggestion would be, we support both on our side, and we try to make it as strong and or at least equally strong, like with each other. There is always decisions that you need to make based on ease of use. For example, like with the digital token, it's easier to carry over, and you have your phone with you everywhere, so wherever you are, you can make payments and stuff. With the hardware token, you need to carry an extra device that is just used only for that one purpose. That is also its weakness, and it's also a strength, because like now, if a mobile phone is hacked, right, or if you lose your mobile phone, somebody could use that device to actually generate OTPs or log into your application. With a security device, even if you lose it, like you need to still enter a pin into that device specifically, like, and then that device needs to be associated with the correct user and everything else. So there is always pluses and minuses, for both. You need to look at it from what is more important. If you are going to be always in a single place, logging in from a single location, you're like, for example, your office, then a hardware token might be the way to go. But I'm not saying that is the, like that's, again, it's up to you, right? If you're traveling a lot, maybe your software token, the software mobile device token might be better, but you may also be able to just carry your hardware token with you because it's not very heavy. So it's a personal preference. We try to make it as equally strong as possible on both, like whichever. Not all organizations may be able to do it. Certain kinds of OTPs, like I said earlier, SMS OTP is not very strong, which is why we don't use it on HSBCnet. Like we provide push notifications or OTP generated on the device as a substitute for the hardware token. So we try to make it like, that's how we make it equal. But that is something that like you need to look at and ask the questions with your vendor or service provider. What is more secure? What are the controls that you have? You need to know that.
Thank you, Shiva. Another one, using APIs is safe. Do you recommend it?
Sorry, APIs are safe.
APIs.
Sorry, Nadia, do you want to address this, or do
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, so the challenge with the APIs is obviously the loss of data that can happen, when an API is used to transmit information from A to B. So one of the key things with the APIs is how are you securing your security end to end, and making sure that you're basically applying the best security standards in respect of APIs. APIs are very safe as long as you do protect those endpoints, and that you are wrapping the API in the right security and encryption along the method, because that way the hacker can't exfiltrate or take out the data that's going across or disrupt it. So yes, they are very safe, provided that you've secured that end to end. If you've left the front door open, it's like any other security, it won't work.
Yeah.
Steve,
so
anything?
Yeah, so this is actually a very good point, because so this actually can be extremely good for certain types of organizations who have development resources internally. So instead of using a interface provided by your banking vendor, what you can do is you can build your own interface. with your own controls, your own authentication controls, your own entitlement controls and everything else, and use the backend provided by the APIs from the bank to actually build your own internal bank, literally, right? So that is something that you can do. You can all, from our side, like we always, we require all the APIs to be secured between the end to end. So, when a customer or a third party provider connects to our APIs, we expect, like mutual TLS. We expect, transaction, the payload to be encrypted and digitally signed with the key exchange that happens at the beginning. So there are lots of security controls that we have put in place. So, like APIs from our side definitely are secure. Now, again, obviously, I can't talk to every other vendor and every other provider. From our side, APIs are secure. You can either use our own, controls. You can actually add to your controls if you have the ability to do it. So like APIs are the way to go, which is where we are going also. Even for internal applications, we are pushing APIs, and that is basically how we would, deliver. But again, like Nadia mentioned, APIs also expose multiple endpoints, more attack surface. As long as you control it and make sure that, like it's protected, you're good.
Thank you, Shiva. Do you think apps like Authenticator ID, or SMS messages are safe?
I think I already mentioned SMS OTP is not safe. Like there are degrees of security on OTPs. Google Authentic, or like I'll say Google Authenticator, but multiple authenticators. Like anything that uses SMS, right? So if your mobile device is hacked or rooted, jailbroken, and somebody is able to like get other applications can read your SMS messages as well if they have the right permissions. So I would not suggest using SMS OTPs at all anywhere if it's possible. But then a lot of because it's called MFA, or considered to be multi-factor authentication, a lot of companies actually provide that. With the other authenticators and stuff, the devil is in the details. For example, Twilio is a company that does authentication or passes authentication information to other companies. They got hacked, and then that resulted in a whole bunch of other companies getting attacked, their customers getting attacked because of the Twilio hack. There is always a degree, so you can't say this is secure or not secure. It is always how that security is implemented, how that particular feature is implemented is what describes the security. So you need to look at it on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you, Shiva. Do you recommend the usage of host-to-host, and why?
Yeah, so host-to-host is a very secure channel, right? It's secured on both ends, from both the bank end and the customer end. It uses very robust security protocols. It's a very well-established channel, so people are very familiar with it. They're familiar with the connectivity. They're familiar with the security instructions, and it tends to be, I don't want to cause bad luck, but we don't tend to see generally much fraud going through that. Any fraud that's through the host-to-host tends to be internal to the customer, because they would have had to impact the file. The biggest risk on host-to-host is the network drive that the customer stores the file in before they upload it. Because if that file is held in plain text, somebody can go in, and if it's a payroll file, maybe play themselves, twice every 2 weeks. And I've seen that before. I've seen a fraud where the lady in accounting made sure that she got paid a salary twice every time, because she understood that unless that file is encrypted, so provided that what you produce out of your ERP system is encrypted, it's stored in a secure location before it's picked up by the host-to-host system and sent to the bank, then actually it's a very secure channel, provided that you don't have any of your team impacting that file.
And not just your team, but also your network, protected, which is which is across, whether you use an online channel or a host-to-host channel, you still need to protect your own network, internal network. It can be, like Nadia said, it can be actually very secure. It also gives you bulk transfer, like, so you don't have to log in and do, like every transaction one by one. It gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of integrating directly with your ERP systems or whatever backend systems that you have, to send payments in. So, and it's actually, like I said, Nadia also mentioned this, that like the connections are secured, end to end between our side and the client side, so that becomes extremely secure.
Okay, thank you, Nadia. Shiva, one last question: how would you define cyber terrorism attacks from your position within the bank?
Okay, so it depends on what you call cyber terrorism, right? So, for example, HSBC, has, like on a daily basis, undergoes denial of service attempts constantly. So, we are constantly getting hit by, multiple, malicious parties, just to try to bring our services down. We are also constantly probed by bots, by like automated scanners, security scanners, like to see if there is any weaknesses available or not, and then that they can exploit. I will take a a very paranoid view, that pretty much anything can end up basically terrorizing a whole bunch of people. And what is the terrorizing part? Where they are not able to perform their operations. They are like scared of using the website. They are scared of using the banking channel. Again, like I said earlier, like depends on what you call cyber terrorism. We consider, we don't really differentiate between cyber terrorism or like random attacks. We consider all of them significant. Like we take action to put in the right controls. We monitor, and we ensure that like we also have a threat intelligence team. The cyber threat intelligence team actually looks in the dark web. They also use vendors to actually look for information about attacks against HSBC. So is somebody planning an attack against HSBC? So if there is chatter on the dark web, they pick that up and then they let us know, and then we can actually be a little bit more wary about like attacks from certain areas or from like on a certain channel, like whatever. So we are always on the lookout for stuff. Like from our point of view, like it doesn't matter if it's a cyber terrorist or a gangster trying to make money, or it's like a kid in the like a teenage kid sitting in his room, like trying to break into something, right? Like it's still like attack is still an attack. And then we are custodians of customer data and their money, like, so we need to ensure that we keep them secure.
Thank you, Shiva. So, well, we are getting to the end. We could stay here, continue talking. Very interesting topic. Thank you, Nadia, Shiva, for your participation today and sharing with us all this valuable knowledge. We have really valuable insights with us. And thank you also to our customers and stakeholders for joining this session. And I pass it over to you, Mauricio, for some final words.
Thank you, Doris. Shiva, Nadia, thank you for the insights. I think it was a very valuable conversation. Great insights, great points. As you see what's going on globally, we're all just need to be ready and prepare of an attack at any point in time. So thank you for sharing that amazing knowledge and having the conversation. And thank you all for participating and asking for questions. We invite you next week on the 7th for the closure of our events. We're going to have also an amazing setup. We have John Waters, the chairman of Strategic Advisory Board for Mandiant, part of Google Cloud. We have Jorge Arce, the co-regional head of Latin America, CEO of HSBC Mexico. Barbara Mainzer, the executive director for the Private Banking Association of Uruguay. Pablo Carretino, the CEO of Interbanking Argentina, and Juan Downey, Chief Information Security Officer for the Association of Banks in Chile. So I think it's going to be a super interesting panel as well. We thank you again, Shiva and Nadia, and we look forward to seeing everybody next week. Thank you again, and have a great week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.